Hello students, good morning to you all. Myself I am Dr. M. Indira, Associate Professor in Department of Biotechnology. Today we will see the second unit that is Fundamentals of Ecosystem. In that various topics are there. One is biotic and abiotic components of the ecosystem, then nutrients and minerals, and function of ecosystem, where we will study about energy flows, nutrient cycles, and systemic approach in functioning of the ecosystem. So today we'll see the first topic, that is the structure of the ecosystem, where we will study about both biotic and abiotic components. So the objective of this particular topic is to overview the structure of an ecosystem, where we have to study the biotic and abiotic components. And after gone through this topic, the expected outcome is the structure of ecosystem, particularly biotic and abiotic components, will be known. Now we will see the video animation where it describes various structural features of the ecosystem. Here it describes abiotic components, those are non-living factors, and biotic components, which are living factors.
Ria was watering the plants in her garden. They look so fresh. But think of this. If we don't water the plants or don't provide enough nutrients or simply keep the plant away from sunlight, will it grow and look fresh? It's a definite no, right? Nature too functions that way. Let me explain. Here in our example, the plant is a living component and the factors like sun, water, soil are non-living. The plant cannot survive on its own. It is dependent on the non-living factors. In our surroundings, there are many living and non-living things, and they coexist. They constantly interact with each other. This is what an ecosystem is. Ecosystem, a community of life forms in concurrence with non-living components interacting with each other. The term ecosystem was first coined by an English scientist, A.J. Tansley, in the year 1953. So you might be wondering, is everything in our surrounding a part of the ecosystem? Yes, it is. An ecosystem could be anything like a small pond to a large ocean. An ecosystem can be broadly classified into two types: terrestrial ecosystem and aquatic ecosystem. From the term terrestrial, we can easily say that it is associated with the land-based ecosystem, and aquatic deals with the water, all water-based ecosystems. Let's now look at each of them and understand their further classifications. There are different types of different terrestrial ecosystem and are spread across different geological regions. They are forest, grasslands, deserts, and tundra ecosystems. A forest consists of many trees, different plants, herbs, and is a host of large varieties of animals, birds, reptiles, insects. Again, here the living and the non-living factors coexist. Coming to grasslands, why do you think it is called grassland? Yes, you guessed it right. Here the vegetation is mainly dominated by grass. Unlike forest, we don't find trees here. Different animals, insects inhabit this region. Desert ecosystem. A hot and dry region which receives scanty rainfall and is mostly barren lands. If you compare with forests, the variety of plants and animals are not found here. Only the plants like cactus, animals like camel are found in this region who can withstand the climate here. Talking about the tundra ecosystem, this region is devoid of wide varieties of trees and found in cold climatic regions. The regions are covered with ice most of the time. The plants and animals in this region are adapted to survive in extreme cold. Here we cover the different terrestrial ecosystems. Now let's explore the aquatic ecosystems now. We all know that there are two main types of water based on salt concentration. Even the ecosystem are classified based on the same. Can you recollect them? They are the marine ecosystem and freshwater ecosystem. The marine ecosystem contains higher salt concentration in the water and includes seas and oceans. They have a wide variety of organisms present in it. The freshwater ecosystem have lesser salt content in the water and includes rivers, ponds, lakes, streams. The variety of organisms is comparatively lesser. So with this, we end our session today. Here we saw what an ecosystem actually is and the classification of it. In the next session, we'll discuss structure of the ecosystem. So stay tuned with us. Hope you have found this session informative. If yes, then what are you waiting for? Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Press the bell icon to stay connected. Until next time, keep watching, keep learning. Thank you.
And we have seen excellent video animation described about the structural features of the ecosystem. Now we will see the introduction part. That is, first, what is ecosystem? So we all know that ecosystem is an area or a region where the living organisms interact with the non-living environment. That means interaction of the organisms with the surrounding environment. That is called as the ecosystem. If you see here, the term eco is nothing but an environment and system is nothing but interaction. So here interaction among the living organisms, not only within the living organisms, these living organisms interact with the surrounding environment. Then it is called as ecosystem. And another definition for this is a biological community. Biological community is nothing but living organisms only, which are formed from plants, animals and microorganisms. Those are called as biological community. So these biological community, they interact with each other, and not only interaction with each other, they interact with the physical environment. So then that particular area is called as an ecosystem. So another scientist, that is Tansley, he coined the term that is ecosystem. And another scientist, E.P. Odum, he described ecosystem as a functional unit of the organism. So these organisms, they play an important role in the ecosystem. So they perform various functions. They circulate or they produce nutrients, and those nutrients are utilized by other organisms, and these nutrients, they move from one consumer to another consumer, just like a cyclic process. So these ecosystem, particularly the living organisms, are the functional unit, and they interact with the environment. Not only with the environment, they interact with each other. So this is called as an ecosystem. So eco means environment and system means interaction. And if you see the variety of ecosystems, broadly we can classify ecosystem into two types. So first one is the terrestrial ecosystem and second one is the aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial ecosystem means nothing but land environment. So again here the terrestrial ecosystem classified into four categories. See here in this picture we can see forest type, and then grassland, desert type and tundra type. That means cold environment type of conditions prevail in this tundra region. So these four categories belongs to the terrestrial type of the ecosystem. And if you see the aquatic type of the ecosystem, mainly two categories are there. So those two categories are the freshwater ecosystem and second one is the marine water ecosystem. And here this freshwater, again in this freshwater, lakes are there, ponds, streams, and then rivers, swamps and springs. So all these comes under the freshwater ecosystem. Whereas marine water ecosystem, mainly the seas and oceans. So these two categories comes under the marine water ecosystem. And in between this one, freshwater as well as marine water, there is mix up of these two water bodies. Then that one is called as estuaries. And the third category of the ecosystem is nothing but artificial or we can say man-made ecosystem. So in this particularly the aquarium and crop field. So these two are made by human beings. So that's why it is called as artificial or man-made ecosystem. So three categories of ecosystem are there. One is terrestrial ecosystem, which includes forest, grasslands, deserts and tundra. And second one, aquatic ecosystem. In this, freshwater ecosystem and marine water ecosystem. In freshwater ecosystem, again lakes, ponds, rivers and streams. And another category in between these two are estuaries. And the third category is called as artificial and man-made ecosystem. So these are the three categories of ecosystem prevail on the earth. And if you see the role of this ecosystem, the ecosystem plays an important role. So this ecosystem requires 5 basic components. What are those basic components means? First one is the energy, second one mineral nutrients, and the third one is the water, oxygen and living organisms. So here, whatever the living organisms, these living organisms gets the energy, and that energy as well as nutrients and water and oxygen. So all together are utilized by the living organism, and these living organisms supplies the food among themselves and they are maintaining the ecological balance. So most of the energy, whatever the energy, it comes from the sunlight. So sunlight is the major source for production of food in the ecosystem. And if you see, the best example for this ecosystem is the biosphere. Biosphere is nothing but the global ecosystem. So in this biosphere, mainly the earth is occupied by the living organisms. So biosphere is the best example for ecosystem. And if you see the ecology or environmental biology, so ecology is nothing but a complex set of relationships between the living organisms and the surrounding environment. So ecology is also another term used for ecosystem, where we will study the interaction, that is the complex interactions between the living organisms with the surrounding environment. And this particular field is very, very important. Why? Because this ecosystem consists of biodiversity. So rich in biodiversity. And again in this ecosystem, every species depends on others. So all these species again depends on the non-living matter. For example, say water is not available, then the existence of life is in trouble. So if food is not available, again the animal life is not questioned. The animal life is in danger zone. So like this, each and every component are interlinked with each other, and again they supply the nutrients among themselves and they are maintaining the ecological balance. So this particular field is very large and it covers global warming, environmental pollution, plant and animal extinctions also. Sometimes because of this human activities, the plants as well as animals, they are in threatened category or they are in endangered category. So because of this, sometimes the population will be in extinct stage. So we need to conserve this particular ecosystem to maintain the ecological balance. And if you see the structural components of the ecosystem, these structural components mainly consist of two categories. One is the abiotic components and second one is the biotic components. So abiotic components are nothing but non-living components. They are not having anything or any life. So again in these two types are there climatic factors and edaphic factors. And if you see the climatic factors, rain, light, wind and temperature. So these all are related to climate. And edaphic factors are nothing but soil, pH, minerals and topography, nothing but the atmosphere. So these all comes under the abiotic components. And if you see the biotic components, these biotic components mainly categorized into three categories. First one is the producers. Producers is nothing but they produce the food material. Second one, consumers. They consume the food. from other animals and decomposers. They act as a natural scavengers. They decompose the dead or decaying organic matter. And in these three categories, again the consumers, they are classified into four categories. Primary consumers, that means small animals, they depend on the producers. So those are called as primary consumers. And secondary consumers, these secondary consumers, they depend on the primary consumers. Then tertiary consumers, these are the large animals or bigger animals, they depend on the secondary consumers. And quaternary consumers, this is the higher level or upper level where these particular animals, they depend on the tertiary category, but they are not eaten up by the any animal. Such category or comes under the quaternary category, that is the upper level. So these are the various structural components of the ecosystem, both abiotic components and biotic components. Abiotic components are climatic factors and edaphic factors. Biotic components are producers, consumers and decomposers. In these consumers, again four classes are there: primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers and quaternary consumers. Now we will see the one by one. So biotic components. So the name itself indicates that biotic, nothing but living components. So the living organisms, particularly, they play an important role in the ecosystem. So here, if you see these biotic components, they are plants, animals as well as microorganisms. So microorganisms, again fungi, bacteria, yeast, algae. So all these comes under this category. And plants, variety of plants are there, variety species of animals are there. All these living organisms comes under the category of biotic components. So again, these biotic components are further classified into three categories. One is producers, consumers and decomposers. So what are these producers, what are these consumers and what are these decomposers? We will see one by one. So if you see the producers, the name itself indicates that they produce, they prepare the food material. So what are those species prepares the food materials means nothing but the plants. Ultimately the plants. So these plants, they get the energy from the sunlight and so these plants, they prepare food material. So that food material is consumed by the other category of biotic components. How these plants prepare food materials means they prepare food materials through photosynthesis process. Photosynthesis process. Here you can see the photosynthesis. So these plant cells are having the pigment, that is chlorophyll. This chlorophyll captures the sunlight and it converts the inorganic components into organic compounds. So through photosynthesis process in the presence of this oxygen. So in the presence of carbon dioxide. And all other living beings, they depend on these plants for their energy. We are also depending on these plants. Every day we eat leafy vegetables. Not only vegetables, the other tomatoes, carrots, everything, they all comes up from the plants only. So the consumers, we are consuming. So these consumers are depending on the producers. And second category, if you see consumers, again in this various categories are there: herbivores, carnivores and omnivores. Herbivores, that means plant eating animals, are called as herbivores. And then carnivores, animal eating animals, are called as carnivores. Omnivores are nothing but they ate both plants as well as animals. And here if you see, the herbivores are the living organisms, feeds on the plants. Carnivores eat other living organisms. And omnivores are animals that can eat both plant as well as the animals. Such type of organisms are called as omnivores. And the third category are called as decomposers. These decomposers, the name indicates that they decompose the dead and decaying organic matter. So, which includes particularly the microorganisms, fungi and bacteria. So, these decomposers, they feed on the dead and decaying organic matter and they convert this organic matter into simpler molecules, or we can say simpler substances. And again, those simpler molecules are again utilized by the plant materials from non-biotic components through soil, water and in the mineral forms they are utilized by the plants. That means these nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, these nutrients are cycled in the biotic components. So, these decomposers are also called as saprophytes. They play a vital role in recycling of the nutrients. So, whatever the simpler molecules formed in this process, those simpler nutrient molecules again are taken up by the plants and these plants synthesize the food material. That food material is consumed by the consumers and those consumers when they become dead. So, the dead and decaying organic matter is digested by these decomposers and it releases into the environment. So, producers, consumers and decomposers all comes under the biotic components. Here you can see the diagrammatic representation of these categories: producers, plants, and then consumers, various animals. They consume this food material, and decomposers, nothing but microorganisms. They decompose the dead and decaying organic matter. Here in this picture you can see plants preparing food material from sunlight, and animals, they are consuming the energy from producers, and decomposers are nothing but this fungi as well as bacteria. They decompose dead and decaying organic matter. And if you see the classification of this biotic components based on the nutrition point of view, we can classify these biotic components into two categories. So, first category is autotrophic, or we can say autotrophs. And second category is called as heterotrophs. Second category is called as heterotrophs. So, here in this picture you can see autotrophs. The name indicates that auto, self. That means self-preparing organisms. So, plants comes under this category, autotrophs. They prepare their own food material. So, that's why they are categorized under autotrophs category. And the remaining consumers and all these comes under this heterotrophs category. Heterotrophs are nothing but they depend on others for their food material. Such category are called as heterotrophs. See here, autotrophs includes all green plants. So, they fix the sunlight and prepares the food material. So, whatever the food material prepared by autotrophs, they are utilized by the heterotrophic components. They are nothing but non-green plants, or we can say the animals, and these animals takes the food from the autotrophs. So, here you can see the producers, the plants produces the food material. So, here the primary consumer, it is feeding on this particular plant material and consuming the food. And here secondary consumers, they are feeding on this particular primary consumers. And here you can see the secondary carnivore, they are feeding on this. And again tertiary carnivore, or we can say consumer, like this tiger, it is feeding on other animals. So, like this, the autotrophs prepare the food material and heterotrophs, they depend on the other animals for their food material. So, this is the nutritional point of view. All biotic components categorized into autotrophs and heterotrophs. Second component. So, in the structural components of ecosystem, we have seen biotic components. Now, we will see the abiotic components. Abiotic components are nothing but non-living components. They are categorized into two categories, physical as well as chemical factors. They play an important role in the ecosystem. They interact with the biotic components and they play a major role. So that means both abiotic as well as biotic components are very much essential in the ecosystem. They maintain the ecological balance. So here the physical and chemical factors. If you see the examples of these abiotic components, those are light, air, soil, water and nutrients. So all these forms the abiotic components of the ecosystem. And if you see the detail of this abiotic components, here abiotic components varies from one ecosystem to another ecosystem. If you see this particular room as an ecosystem, so table, chairs and then floor and then cloth. So all these materials comes under abiotic components. If we take another grassland where the tools are the abiotic components. So that means varies from one ecosystem to another ecosystem. See here the example aquatic ecosystem. In this abiotic components are water, pH, sunlight, turbidity, water depth and salinity. So all these comes under the abiotic component. And if you see the terrestrial ecosystem, terrestrial means a land type of ecosystem where we'll see the soil types, temperature, rain, altitude and wind and nutrients and sunlight all comes under the terrestrial part of the ecosystem. So these are the abiotic factors in the terrestrial ecosystem. So for all these things, the sun is the major source of the energy. So the energy comes from the sun is utilized by the producers and these producers they synthesize the food material and this food material is consumed by the consumers so that the energy flows from sun again to the producers and to the consumers. Like this, the sun play an important role in the biological reactions of the ecosystem. So these are the abiotic factors of both aquatic as well as the terrestrial ecosystem. And if you see the classification of this abiotic components, we categorized into two categories. So first one is the climatic factors, second one is the edaphic factors. Climatic factors are atmosphere, rain, temperature, light, wind and humidity. And if you see the edaphic factors, these factors include soil, pH, topography and minerals. So these are the two categories of factors comes under the abiotic components. If you see the important components in this particular abiotic category, atmosphere plays an important role. If you see the atmosphere is nothing but outer space of the earth. So it reaches over 560 kilometers from the surface of this particular earth. The entire region is called as atmosphere. And again in this atmosphere there are various levels are there. So these levels are based on the temperature. And if you see the levels, first one is the troposphere and second level is the stratosphere, third one is the mesosphere and fourth one is the thermosphere. So these are the various levels in the atmosphere. Among all these four levels, the first level play an important role in the ecosystem. So this troposphere is the lowest one. It occupies around 10 kilometers from the surface of the earth and usually this is the thicker in the at equatorial region and whereas it is in thinner in the poles region. And all organisms they require various gases from the atmosphere. What are those gases? If you see those gases, oxygen, nitrogen and other gases, carbon dioxide, and these are the major gases required for the living organisms. Not only those, other gases also used hydrogen, helium and methane. So these gases comes from the atmosphere. So they play an important role in the ecosystem. Second one is the water. This is also very much essential and play an important role. Without water, we cannot sustain our life. So, water plays an important role in the ecosystem. So, it is very much essential component in the ecosystem. Both acts as an internal as well as the external medium. And if you see this water, it occupied around 70% of the earth's surface. And this one is used for several purposes and play an important role, and it transfers or maintains the nutrients and transport into various parts of the ecosystem. So, this water, particularly the abiotic portion of this ecosystem, they transfer or passes the nutrients or the minerals into the biotic components. So, this water play an important role. And another one is the soils. So, these soils are nothing but minerals. So, mixture of fragments and minerals and organic debris as well as living organisms. Whatever the dead part or debris part of this living organisms and minerals, all nutrients makes the soils. So, the soil play an important role. So, this soil almost provides the nutrients to the plants. Particularly if you see the terrestrial ecosystem where the plants gets the nutrients from the soil only. So, these soils acts as a carriers for transfer of these nutrients in the ecosystem. So, these are the medium for the detritus food chain and support all organisms. That means whatever the dead and decaying organic matter is there, and this soil provides the base for this decomposes, so that those decomposes convert this organic one into simpler molecules. Those simpler molecules entered into the soil portion, and from this soil is taken up by the plant materials, and plants synthesize the food material. That food material is consumed by the other consumers. That like this, these soils play an important role in the cycling of the nutrients. And if you see this ecosystem, it is a complex interaction happen between the both biotic as well as the abiotic components. So, here you can see the interaction between biotic and abiotic components. So, here the energy flows from one medium to another medium in the form of nutrient cycles. We will see in the next class also. And if these ecosystems don't have boundaries, the interactions get affected even if one factor is changed or removed. So, it ultimately affects the other factors of the ecosystem. And the summary of this particular topic is the structural components of ecosystem classified into both abiotic components and biotic components. Abiotic components are climatic factors and edaphic factors. Biotic components are producers, consumers and decomposers. Consumers again primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary consumers. So, here these are the structural components of this ecosystem. Here you can see various organic and inorganic components as well as abiotic components and producers, macro as well as micro consumers. And you can see the various types of ecosystems. One is terrestrial category of ecosystem and another one is the aquatic category of the ecosystem. This is the overall view and summary of the ecosystem. And now we will see the study questions. Define ecosystem, explain different types of ecosystem with examples and describe the structural components of ecosystem. What are biotic components and describe abiotic components. So, these are the study questions. Go through the material and these are the various references collected for developing this digital content. So, we are acknowledging the online resources and public domain for developing this digital lecture. So, thank you all.